welcome Dr. Hugh Ross. Now I'd like to welcome all of you here this morning for this very wonderful and interesting and edifying conversation on the relationship between science and the Bible, particularly addressing the question of whether they are enemies, as is so often depicted in our society, or whether they are actually allies. That's Dr. Ross's view, that's my view, I think it's a lot of our view, and we're going to get some reasons to believe that, or even to consider it to be true. So I'd like to remind you that there, on the back side of this folder, which I hope you all received, there's a place to mark your questions or comments that you would like to make during the question and answer time after the initial conversation. So with those prefaces, let's begin. Dr. Ross? Sure. So you were here a number of years ago, somewhere around 20 years ago, but for those who weren't here then, could you just tell us a little bit about how you got to be sitting in this chair here this morning?
I was born, raised, and educated in Canada. And unlike here in the United States, Christians are hard to find.
They're not here.
All right. As I say, I was born, raised, and educated in Canada, and I didn't meet Christians until I was 27 years of age. That happened when I joined the Caltech faculty. And, but I got into astronomy when I was just 7 years of age, and knew from the age of 8 onwards that would be my future career. And that's what persuaded me there had to be a God. And I was actually studying Big Bang cosmology when I was 16 and realized, well, if there's a beginning, there's got to be a beginning. And starting at age 17, I began to look at the world's great philosophers to see if they had anything to tell me about this God behind the universe, and recognize that what they were saying was not consistent with what we were knowing about the universe. They were basically saying that time was eternal, and astronomers were telling us that time was created when the universe had its beginning. And then I went to look at the world's holy books, and examined the Hindu Vedas and the Quran and the Buddhist commentaries, looked at the Mormon scriptures, and noticed that what they were saying about the universe was not true. They were saying things like the universe reincarnates as multiple beginnings, and we have observations that tell us that can't happen. But finally, I did pick up a Bible. So,
well, that leads to a question that I had when I heard you describe this earlier, and that is, the Bible came last in your readings of the various books. I guess, given that you were born in Canada and the Western Hemisphere here, I might have thought you would read it sooner than the others.
well,
you have a suspicion that it was going to be the right answer.
well, the first book I ever read in cosmology was when I was 7, and it was a book by Fred Hoyle. And even though he was not a Christian, what he said about the Bible is that it's filled with statements about cosmology. And I was mainly starting from the viewpoint that God created this marvelous universe, but there's 50 billion trillion stars. Why would he pay attention to us beings on this little insignificant speck that we call Earth? So my starting point was all these holy books were simply human-crafted attempts to describe this. And my goal was to show that all these books were fraudulent. And so I felt that the easiest books to take on in terms of looking for provable errors would be things like the Vedas, the Quran, the Hindu commentary, the Buddhist commentaries. I knew the Bible would be a significant challenge, so I kept that to the end. I also knew it was most specific, and so therefore it was going to be a greater challenge to try to prove wrong. And literally I spent 18 months going through the Bible 1 or 2 hours a day, trying to search for a provable error or contradiction.
but I couldn't find any. I could find lots of things I didn't understand, but nothing I could identify as a provable error or contradiction. And the process, what stunned me, was to discover that this book we call the Bible, thousands of years ago, talked in detail about the universe, its beginning, its history, and Big Bang cosmology jumped off the page.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Could you give some examples of where we see that?
Well, I mean, even when you look at the first sentence in the Bible, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I said, I wonder what this heavens and earth is all about. And as I read through the Old Testament, I realized you never see the word universe. But this phrase is the heavens and the earth with the definite articles. Always means the totality of physical reality. And the word create means to create something brand new that never existed before. I said, well, that's the foundational element of Big Bang cosmology, that there's a beginning of matter, energy, space, and time. And what I saw is that these other holy books spoke about God's creating within space and time, but the Bible says that God creates independent of space and time. But I guess what surprised me the most was the Bible spoke about the universe expanding, how God stretches up the heavens. 6 different Bible authors speak about the expansion of the universe. And no scientist even dreamed of that concept until the 20th century. They also talked about how the universe has laws of physics that don't change. And one of those laws is a pervasive law of decay. And as a young physics student, I said, here's the Bible predicting that the universe is going to get colder and colder as it gets older and older. And again, none of these concepts were even thought of in the scientific community until the 20th century. But here are Bible authors thousands of years ago declaring these repeatedly and specifically. So that was my first clue that this book was actually predicting future scientific discoveries. And it was doing it consistently and repeatedly, even hundreds of times. I said that can only be possible if the one that created the universe inspired the human authors. And that's what persuaded me to sign my name in the back of a Gideon Bible at age 19, giving my life to Jesus Christ. But it took me another 8 years to be Christians.
I think we're very blessed that we got to that point so young, so soon.
Well, I think what I'd like to say is that if you come to Christianity along that path, it may not be that easy to find a good church where people believe the Bible is the Word of God. Churches I tried in Canada, people either didn't believe it was the Word of God or they were a cult. And so I didn't have anyone to help me find a good church. And good churches are hard to find in Canada. They're a lot easier to find here. And when I came to Caltech, I found Christians all over the astronomy department. Some of the world's most famous astronomers were Christians, and they helped me find a church.
Let's talk about that for a minute. We sort of are given the impression that any intelligent scientist is going to be considering the Bible to be a bunch of fairy tales. You did not find it to be so, and you've had some experiences, such as in the former Soviet Union, that are just remarkable. Can you tell us a little bit about that, at least that one trip?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I'm a Gideon convert, so I do fundraisers for the Gideons.
Okay.
And I did one in Santa Barbara where we raised about $35,000 for Gideon Bibles in Russia. And this is back in the 1980s. It was still ruled by the communists, and it was a Soviet atheistic empire. But I got an interesting invitation to go to Russia while the Soviets were still in control. In fact, the Soviet lab funded the trip. And they said, we want you to come and speak to our scientists about science and God. But they said, if we ever catch you sharing your Christian faith with a non-scientist, we'll immediately deport you and you'll never be invited back. And when I realized these were scientists who were getting out of the country anyway. And so this was the Soviets' attempt to try to pacify their scientists. But I remember giving a talk in Moscow to about 700 physicists. And after I gave a talk on astronomy and how it demonstrated the existence of God, And one of the physicists in the Q&A time said, "Can you please tell us how you became a Christian?" And I gave my story, and then I also gave an invitation that if any one of them wanted to give their life to Christ, they could. And I said, if you made that, I made a prayer. They prayed with me. And I said, if you made that prayer to give your life to Christ today, could you please indicate it by putting your name on a piece of paper and sending it up to the front? Now, I was naive. I didn't realize there was a paper shortage in Russia. A virtual riot started out because I saw these physicists screaming and yelling, trying to find pieces of paper. And then they'd get a single sheet of paper and rip it up into the tiniest pieces possible so they could all write their name on it. And we had a mountain of these little tiny scraps of paper on the table in front. And then in the back were two men that were standing through the whole thing. They had Gideon Bibles to give to every one of those physicists. And they talked to me afterwards and said, "Remember that fundraiser you did? These are the Bibles." So that's it.
When I first heard you tell that story, I was thinking you were going to say that those two men were KGB.
I thought they were.
And,
they were dressed like they were. So.
And then asking a scientist to put his name on this piece of paper. What happened to the pieces of paper, too? I mean, that was a risky thing that they did.
It was a very risky thing, but I think what made it a little bit safer is the first 4 rows were reserved for Communist Party leaders.
Okay.
And none of the scientists were allowed to ask questions until the party leaders asked for questions first. So yeah, there were KGB leaders there were Army generals and Communist Party leaders from Politburo were all there. And, but they were spiritually hungry. They were asking questions about God and science. And they too want to know how to become a Christian. And I think that opened the door for the physicists to respond. So
that's just so fantastic to hear that an event like that could take place. Have you stayed in touch with any of those folks?
Well, a number of those folks have remained on our mailing list. In fact, I just received an invitation a couple of weeks ago to go back to Kiev. I've been to Kiev, and at the time it was Leningrad, but now it's St. Petersburg and Moscow. And one of our books is translated into Russian, and our DVD, Journey Toward Creation, has been broadcast in Russian. So there's stuff going on. Well, what was interesting is they would tell me, he said, the reason why we responded in such huge numbers today is that every Friday afternoon we had to listen to a 2-hour lecture on scientific atheism. And so after you listen to about 20 years of those lectures, that really convinces you there's got to be a God. That's a great line. You refer to the expanding universe and also to this planet's place in the universe, kind of insignificant, off in a dark corner. What does that all mean to you? I wound up writing a book on why the universe is the way it is, and yet we are literally in a dark corner. In fact, our planet Earth resides in the darkest, life-conceivable location, not only in our galaxy, but in the entire universe. And it's because of that incredibly dark location that we astronomers can make our observations. Because of that, incredible darkness, our telescopes can actually see this feeble light from the cosmic creation event, the cosmic background radiation. If we were anywhere else, you wouldn't be able to see that. And it's our ability to witness the light from the cosmic creation event where we get our most compelling and rigorous scientific evidence that a God beyond space and time was to create the universe. And it's also there where we get our most spectacular evidence for supernatural design. Because we can see that feeble light, we know that the universe is 75% dark energy. A dark energy that's embedded in the space surface of the universe. And if you were to change the value of that by as little as 1 part in 10 to the 122nd place of the power index, no light would be possible anytime, anywhere. And that ranks 10 to the 99 times superior to the best level of creative design that we human beings are capable of. So it means that the one that designed this dark energy must be at least 10 to the 99 times. That's 100 trillion times more intelligent, more knowledgeable than you and I. And that many times better funded than the U.S. government that enabled us to make these amazing discoveries. So this God is not only a transcendent being, he must be a personal being. Because only a personal being can manifest intellect, knowledge, creativity, and power.
Okay, wow. Are you sure about those
numbers? Well, it was something that was discovered about 25 years ago and has now been confirmed through 25 different sets of observations. So it was interesting because when this dark energy was first discovered, a team of 3 atheist theoretical physicists said, we got to get rid of this. The universe is performing miracles according to his intent and purpose to shape everything for life. And so they tried to claim that there was no such thing as dark energy, that it didn't exist. But literally just months after they published their paper, astronomers came up with 9 independent demonstrations that yes, it does exist. Moreover, it makes up most of the stuff in the universe.
Does anyone else here not know what dark energy, I know those 2 English words, but can you?
Yeah, it's the energy that's embedded in the space surface of the universe. And the universe is kind of like planet Earth. Earth is 3 dimensions, but we humans live in the 2-dimensional surface of the 3-dimensional Earth. All the stars and galaxies, in fact, all the matter and energy is constrained to the 3-dimensional surface of the 4-dimensional expanding universe. But that surface is energy embedded in it. And the way it works is as the larger the surface becomes, the more that energy works to accelerate the expansion of the universe. Gravity works to slow it down. Dark energy works to speed it up. And what we astronomers have noticed is for the first half of the history of the universe, it was slowing down. But once the space surface got large enough, it dominated gravity. And so for the last 7 billion years, the universe has been speeding up in its expansion. And if it doesn't have that slow down and that speed up at just the right rate, you will not get the planets you need for advanced life showing up at the right time in the right place. I don't know about your family, but when we celebrate Thanksgiving, we thank God for dark energy.
We haven't done that yet. Wow. So, I'm sitting here thinking that I just need to ask you to clarify more of the reasons that science is the ally of Scripture rather than its enemy.
Well, when I came to Caltech, I ran into a lot of astronomers who are Christians that really struggled about the reason why they didn't share their faith. They couldn't put the Bible and their science together. And a lot of it had to do with Genesis 1. And, I was taught the scientific method in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. We got it every year. And when I first picked up a Bible at age 17, the scientific method left off the page. I mean, because you open up Genesis 1, and before you get to the 6 days, it gives you the point of view. That's step 1 of the scientific method. Don't interpret until you establish the point of view. The Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the waters of planet Earth. Then the second step of the scientific method, don't interpret until you establish the starting conditions. And Genesis 1:2 says it's dark on the surface of the waters. The clouds cover the surface of the waters. Water covers the whole surface. It's empty of life and it's unfit for life. And then you get a sequence of events. Then at the end of those 6 days, there's a statement about how conditions are different from the initial conditions. Well, those are the first 4 steps of what we call the scientific method. Now, when I was 27, I read a book on the origin of the scientific method and discovered that its origin comes from the pages of the Bible. And so it's no accident that the scientific revolution exploded out of Reformation Europe. I mean, this is a Lutheran church. The Reformation is when people began to read the Bible for themselves. And people with a scientific bent read the Bible, discovered this biblical testing method, applied it to their scientific research, and then that was the birth of the scientific revolution. But if you follow that biblical testing method, then all the events in Genesis 1 are described in the correct order, and they have the correct description of what happened. And when I read that as a 17-year-old, I said, there's no way Moses could have guessed this. He must have been inspired by the one that actually created everything. So that was one of my first clues that this book was different from the other books that make up the religions of the world. But when I came to Caltech, I found there was all these people who had the wrong viewpoint. They thought God was telling us a story from above the earth rather than on the earth. And if that's your perspective, then it's teaching scientific nonsense. And this is the tension they had. But, when we began to talk, they said, now I can put it together. And now I can share my faith. Because I remember Ben Vogt, for example, calling me into his office. He said, shut the door. And when the door was shut, he told me he was a Christian. Told me what church he went to. He was involved in the choir there. I said, don't tell anybody that I told you I'm a Christian. I said, why? He says, because I can't put the two together. But when he was able to put the two together, then that set him free to share his faith.
Yeah, I've heard this phrase, non-overlapping magisteria. I can't remember.
Right. Stephen Gould came up with that, right?
And that idea is that the Bible and science just aren't dealing with the same world as a world.
Well, that's how some Christians deal with attention. They just say, science is over here, the Bible's over here. They never overlap. The Bible only deals with who and why, and science deals with what and where. But the truth is they do overlap. I mean, we're looking at the beginning of the universe. There's a beginning, that has theological implications. And that paper I was telling you about dark energy, written by those three atheist physicists, they understood the theological implications of dark energy, which is why they wanted to get rid of it. But now we are compelled to conclude there must be someone behind the universe who performed miracles on his own intent for the purpose of helping us human beings. If you look at the Bible, notice you got this book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job. It's the most science-laden book in the entire Bible. And I think for good reason. I believe it's the most ancient book that's in the Bible. And so God is basically telling us, before scriptures existed, look at the realm of nature. It will tell you about me. And then there's just all kinds of details. I mean, what impressed me when I first picked up the book of Job, it talked about cosmic darkness. I said, why is this there? Well, now we realize it's cosmic darkness that gives us the most compelling evidence that a God beyond space and time created everything. And then what it says about the animals. I mean, Job says, look to the beasts, they'll teach you about God. Look to the birds, they'll instruct you. And something I've noticed as I travel around the world, the atheists I engage live in cities. They don't live in the countryside. And so I think Job has got a point. These birds, these mammals, they really do teach you things about God, yourself, and how you can come into a relationship with God. That's exactly how the book of Job ends, where God talks to Job and his friends about all these animals that he created. It says, they speak about me. Let me show you how.
At the end there, he talks about Leviathan and Behemoth, and I learned from you that those aren't dinosaurs.
They're not dinosaurs. And you look at the larger context, it's about what Genesis calls the soulish animals. Now there's three origins of life in Genesis 1. Physical life, life that's physical and soulish. These are the birds and mammals in day 5. Then one and only one species that's body, soul, and spirit, human beings. And when God says to Job and his friends, you've been able to tame all manner of these bird and mammal species, but some are more difficult to tame than others. For example, a lion is more difficult to tame than a goat. But he says there's two that are especially difficult to tame, the behemoth and the leviathan. And for 1,800 years, the church always understood those creatures to be the crocodile and the hippopotamus. They're terrifying animals. They're extremely difficult to tame. But what I love about Job, in the very last chapter, God jumps in and says, but there's one species of life you can't tame. Notice it takes a higher species to tame the birds and mammals. Likewise, it takes me to tame a proud human heart. And if you don't come to me for the humility you need to develop a relationship with me, it's not going to happen. So look at these animals, realize it takes a higher being to tame them. It's going to take a higher being to tame you.
It certainly does. I'm going to go to the seventh day question. I really like the way you describe the seventh day. Maybe it will be new to the folks here. So go ahead, and 6 days, and I don't want to get into how many hours the days are, or how many years they are. Maybe they'll come up with the questions, but
Sure.
But the open-endedness of the seventh day and why God resting affects many people's ability to see God and what's going on.
Well, as a young astronomy student at age 17, I was reading Genesis 1 and wondering what these days are all about. And what I noticed is that the first 6 days have closure. There's an evening and a morning. And I wasn't really aware of what those words meant in Hebrew, but said at a minimum, it's telling us each day's got a point where it begins and a point where it ends. And then when I got to the seventh day in Genesis 2, I noticed there's no evening and morning. And this is the day when God rests. And when I was 9 years of age, my parents bought me these books of evolutionary biology. I remember reading them and realizing, if it's only billions of years, there's not enough time to make all this work. The numbers don't add up. But when I read Genesis, it answered for me a problem that had bothered me since I was 9. Why do we see all these new species of life coming into existence before humans and virtually none afterwards? When I read Genesis 1, it all clicked. For 6 days God creates. On the seventh day, he stops creating. And that's why we see all the speciation before human beings and virtually none afterwards. It also answered for me the question, why is it that most scientists don't believe? Because the most common statement you hear from scientists is, we don't see God in our scientific research. And when I read Genesis 1, I said, now I know why. Because the vast majority of scientists are life sciences. I'm an astronomer, but there's only about 12,000 of us in the world. There's over 3 million research biologists. And most of those biologists do their research in the human era. And that's when God's at rest. So all they see is natural process. But also explains why so many astronomers believe. Because our data is coming from deep time. It takes time for the light to travel from a galaxy to our telescope. So we see the handiwork of God everywhere. But the biologist looking on day 7 sees no evidence for God's supernatural intervention. For 6 days God creates, on the 7th day he rests. And I remember reading on in the Bible and realizing there's multiple passages in the Bible that tell us we're still in God's 7th day. Hebrews 4, live your life so that you will enter into God's 7th day. And it won't end until God has conquered and removed evil once and for all. And clearly evil is still here. So we're still in the 7th day.
Be careful about the time. Let's talk about the book of Job and your description of the plot of the book of Job. I was intrigued to hear that these guys who lived thousands of years ago were really smart. A lot of times folks think that they didn't know as much as we do now.
They are smart, and they knew a lot more than some of our top scientists know today. And I think it's because they were in contact with the book of nature, whereas a lot of our brilliant brilliant scientists are stuck in a lab in a big city, and they don't get to see the kinds of things that people thousands of years ago literally saw every day. And when you read the book of Job, it's interesting how Job and his friends keep referring to the natural realm around them, the stars and the plants and the animals, the rain. I mean, in Job 37, you've got an entire chapter which talks about the water cycle and how we have all these different kinds of frozen precipitation and liquid precipitation, and how we need them all in order to be able to thrive here on our planet. Where, I took a class on the water cycle, and all we talked about was rain. But realizing here in California, we don't get snow, we're in trouble. And we don't get hail, we're in trouble. And we need dew. And just realizing we need all these forms of precipitation. So, and then just the whole point about the animals and the problem of evil. I mean, Job and his friends knew that evil was all around them. But they also knew the answer to that problem lay in the record of nature. And it's interesting the different perspectives that Job and his friends took on this. So kind of what I do in my book is just actually show you how what you see described in Job about the natural realm, the birds, the mammals, the plants, the rainfall, actually ties into how God wants to bring about the end of all evil and suffering, and how he wants to bring redemption to every human being who wants to escape that realm of evil and suffering. And so I love the way that Job and his friends look to the natural realm to see the plan of salvation. And the reason why they were able to see it so well is they were in contact with nature, but also I think they were really gifted men. I mean, it tells us that Eliphaz came from Teman, and Teman was a famous city at that time, famous for its very well-educated and brilliant population. And I think what happened is the citizens sent our best scholar to talk to him, and so they sent Eliphaz. And I remember when I was first reading the book of Job, it says, this sounds a lot like my graduate school days, because at the University of Toronto, our department would bring 4 of the world's most brilliant astronomers together to give us lectures for a whole week. But to me, the best part of that week was when we got to have dinner with the 4, because they would debate one another. And then listening to that debate was better than all their lectures. And so I kind of looked at Elihu. Elihu says nothing until the 32nd chapter. I think he was memorizing what was going on. And that's actually common in ancient Hebrew literature, is that when someone was giving a wise discourse, people would sit there, listen carefully, and try to memorize everything that was being said. So I think that was Elihu. He was doing that, realizing this is a debate that we're never going to see again. In fact, I refer to it here as probably the greatest debate that humanity has ever been exposed to, was Job and his 3 friends. And it's a debate that every one of us needs to read and understand.
And Elihu may have been the one who remembered it enough to put it down.
Well, remembered it enough, because the thing you notice about Job, it's written in poetry, except for the first and last chapters. And it's written in a Hebrew poetry that's designed to be easily memorized. And there's lots of clues in the text that it probably is in the era of Abraham or even earlier, which means Hebrew was not yet a written language. Not until the days of Moses did it become a written language. And therefore having it in some form that could be easily memorized was crucial for its preservation.
I'm going to ask you a question about a presentation by the late Frank Pastore. He was a Christian radio host for a while recently. Before that, he was a professional baseball pitcher with the Cincinnati Reds. And on YouTube, you can see a presentation by him shortly before his tragic accidental death, where he addresses 4 big bangs. And I see him as answering 4 questions. Why is there anything? Why is some of that stuff alive? Why is some of that live stuff aware of itself? And then where do we get the idea that there is good and evil. And I don't think science is doing so well with those questions.
Well, scientists admit they do not have answers to any of those questions from a naturalistic perspective. I mean, there's been books written on consciousness, and the atheists admit they haven't got a clue where that consciousness came from. We attend Origin of Light research conferences, and it's unlike any other kind of conference you attend. Usually when I go to an astronomy conference, there's thousands of people gathered there, and it's cracking with excitement about the new discoveries and all the advances we're making. Well, when Fuzz Ron, our staff biochemist, and myself attended these Origin of Light research conferences, there weren't thousands. There was only 300. The numbers shrink year to year. And then you walk into the meeting, and instead of the cracking with excitement and enthusiasm and joy, it's despair and despondency and depression. Why? Because now we're meeting again, and it's even worse from a naturalistic perspective than it was the last time we met. The problems really are intractable. And it really boils down to the fact that we have hard scientific evidence that the origin of life happened in a geologic instant, not over a long period of time, and happened without the benefit of prebiotic molecules. Planet Earth never had a prebiotic soup. And you got no soup, and you got no time, you got no naturalistic answer to where life came from. Now they're thinking it happened in outer space and got delivered to planet Earth, but we've yet to find any amino acids or nucleotides, and especially none of the 5 and 6 carbon sugars anywhere in interstellar space. And we also know if we try to move that stuff across interstellar space, that trip will break down those molecules. So again, there's nowhere in the universe where you can find a source for these molecules. God himself must have been the one who came here and put it all together. So there's that, there's the origin of consciousnness. Then, what about us human beings? I mean, we seem to be compelled to think about God. I mean, the atheists are obsessed about God. In fact, I remember doing a debate at Caltech at the International Skeptic Society conference. And the entire conference was devoted to the non-existence of the God of the Bible. And I said, well, how come the gods of the other religions of the world are ignored? All the focus is on the God of the Bible. And all you atheists were really convinced that this God doesn't exist. You'd be treating him like the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny. Your passion tells me you really do believe that he exists, but you don't like him. But what they shared with me was really interesting. They said it's not that we don't like the God of the Bible, it's that we despise his followers. Every one of them told me stories of how they had bad experiences with people who call themselves Christians. So, but I had a really good debate there, and the fellow I debated, a particle physicist named Victor Stenger, he was gracious, and we got to talk like this. And that to me is how a debate should be done. Not talk past one another with rebuttals and counter-rebuttals where you basically ignore one another, but actually engage. And so we did that. And there's actually a DVD of that out front. By the way, you can get it from the Skeptic Society, but they charge you 6 times as much. We want you to see it. We literally sell it for just the cost of the item, because it's really dramatic what these atheists say at the end of the debate. Startling statements that they make. But it gives you an example of what happens when you go into a situation like that with evidence, but also being prepared to do it in the spirit of 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give good reasons for the hope within you, but with gentleness, respect, and a clear conscience. What I got from those atheists, this is the first time they'd ever heard or experienced a gentle, respectful response from believers. And it wasn't just me, it was all of our volunteers at our book table. And they said, we've never been treated like this by people who call themselves Christians, and we've never heard this evidence before. In fact, the most common question I got is, how come you Christians don't present this evidence? And I said, well, it's the kind of evidence that Christians like to fight over. But a really is what Frank Pastore said, is that this is the stuff non-Christians need. You know, the origin of the universe, where did everything come from? Where did light come from? Where did consciousness come from? Why are we so focused on God? And we can bring those issues up. As divisive as they might be within the church, these are the critical things we need to talk about. And hey, it's all right for it to be divisive in church. At least let's get people talking about it. In fact, this is what I argue the Sabbath is all about. It's a time to talk about the most important issues of life. But you know, I'm a fellow pastor, and it grieves me that in so many churches across America, we avoid the most important issues of life and quote, in an attempt to keep peace. But God has called us to make peace, not keep peace. There is a gracious way to deal with this. And non-Christians need to see us dealing with these issues with grace and humility and compassion for one another.
I think you just answered my next question. Because we have a title here. It's Science and the Bible, Enemies or Allies. And that's a two-way street. If we are to be allies of science, we have to be gracious. We have to listen and give reasons why we believe. If I had to speculate why we have trouble with that, it may be the sea we swim in, the intellectual sea we swim in, where we are only allowed to be represented by people who may not share our views, but they get the microphone time. I'm thinking of the science guy debate with Ken Ham.
Oh yeah, Bill Nye and Ken Ham, yes.
And many other such examples. So that's no excuse for us to be hostile.
It's not, and you know, what I share with my scientist colleagues too is that they're unnecessarily intimidating to the lay public. They don't realize how intimidating they can be. I mean, they use a jargon and a language that very few people understand, and they tend to come across like they know things that the rest of the people don't know, and I'm smarter than you. That's not a good way to communicate to a lay audience. And so it's partly the fault of scientists, but it's also partly the fault of Christians who treat these scientists like they're all pagans and rebels against God. A lot of them are asking very challenging questions out of sincere honesty and trying to find the truth. I mean, I remember when I was at Caltech, there was a fellow from Australia, and he would come into my office and ask me these challenging questions about the Christian faith. And he would go down to the coffee room and ridicule everything I said to the other astronomers there. That went on every day for almost 2 years. And then finally, Ian Lockhart went down to the coffee room and said, I can't ridicule what Hugh Ross is telling me, because last night I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And what I realized is he was asking all the questions he knew he would have to answer if he gave his life to Christ. And that's what Ian shared with me. He said, you know, even a year before I gave my life to Christ, I wanted to become a Christian. But I couldn't become a Christian until I could answer all the challenging questions. And so what I did is I gave you those challenging questions in the tone and the demeanor that I knew I would receive them in. So he said, I acted very hostile, but on purpose. A lot of scientists are like Ian Lockhart. And we need to realize, you know, sometimes they're asking the questions they know they're going to get and doing it in a way. And so it's important that we reach out to them and help them through those intellectual barriers. And the heart cannot rejoice in what the mind rejects.
I'd say it's probably time for us to open this thing up to some questions. And before I do that, though, let's have you explain the reasons to believe ministry, what's out there. You've alluded to some things that are available for sale and so on, and then maybe we'll get the microphones ready to be carried around.
Well, Reasons to Believe is an organization my wife and I founded 28 years ago now. And it's based on the premise that we're living in a time when people don't believe in God that loves them. You know, Hebrews 11:6. Those that come to God must believe that He exists and rewards those that earnestly seek Him. So our organization focuses on developing new reasons to believe in Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior. And God told us that we've got 2 books, the book of nature and the book of Scripture. So we use the book of nature to find these new reasons. And literally every day there are scientific discoveries being made that make for a stronger case for the Christian faith. I mean, often you run into scientists who will say, you know what? I don't have absolute proof that God exists. And I say, well, I don't have absolute proof He exists either. I don't have absolute proof my wife exists. But I've been married to her for 36 years, and every year I got more evidence that she exists than the year before. And so it's like that with God. The evidence gets greater and greater. And the evidence is getting greater and greater rather than lesser and lesser. That is adequate proof that God exists. And hey, about 10 papers a day are being published that make for a stronger case for the Christian faith. But it's not just scientists we reach out to. It is, we've led a Nobel laureate to Christ. But our goal is to reach everybody with these new reasons to believe. And we package it for the layman. So there's books, DVDs. Matter of fact, you all got this card. If you fill it out, we'll give you a free DVD where I'm answering questions in front of a skeptical audience, and where I give a little more detail about how astronomy brought me to faith in Christ. So it's this DVD, Cosmic Fingerprints. And this has been one of the most effective tools that we've developed that you can give away to bring people to Christ. So that's a free gift. Then there's books and DVDs out there. This debate that we did at Caltech in front of the Skeptic Society, that's out there as well. So please take advantage of that. And we actually have a chapter that we've launched right here in this area. If you want to get involved in the chapter and be trained to do the kinds of things that we do, with kids and youth and adults, feel free. Our people at the back table to do that. But yeah, we want to take some time to answer your questions and your issues. So.
Okay, so who's going to go first? Yes, sir.
Pope Benedict stated, rather intolerantly, that all other systems of belief are fatally defective. Science, on the other hand, is tolerant of evidence, even that which overturns existing theories. Isn't this the major distinction between religion and science? And isn't this distinction irreconcilable? Thank you.
That's a really good question. Because that's how science advertises itself, and unfortunately a lot of people from a religious perspective see it as being very intolerant. But this is what attracted me about Christianity. Sometimes laws, where if you leave the Hindu faith and join another faith, you will be prosecuted. And likewise, that's true in the Islamic world. But what attracted me about Christianity, it tolerates and encourages a free market exchange of ideas. The truth will survive in that kind of environment. So in Christian nations, there's been the freedom of religion, the freedom of investigation. And, you say science is tolerant. It is. It's tolerant in the sense that we give everybody the freedom to investigate different ideas, different models, different theories. However, it's based on the scientific method. It's only tolerated if it can withstand scrutiny from the scientific method. So, for example, if the scientific community no longer tolerates the flat earth hypothesis because it's been refuted by the scientific method. But as long as there's even a particle of possibility that a theory or an hypothesis might survive, it is tolerated. But it reaches a point where we no longer tolerate it. Well, I would argue Christianity operates on the same basis, that we can tolerate all different kinds of belief systems within the church if they can pass this biblical testing method. But if they don't, that's why we have the creeds. The creeds within Christianity are those things where we've been able to see such great clarity in the Bible that it rules out alternate explanations. But because our Christian creeds are relatively short, we allow a lot of room and freedom for discussion and debate about the non-essentials of the Christian faith. So as a scientist, Newtonian mechanics and general relativity are not up for grabs. That's solid, that's not going to change. And likewise, the bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead is something that's not going to change. In both cases, there's clarity and overwhelming evidence in support of them.
In the intellectual community, there is a lot of distrust or resistance to Christianity. I know you have books, you have CDs, you have things. What would be something that we could give to people that we know who are just not convinced? I mean, do you have something that you've written? Do you have a resource we could go to that we could offer? Because it has to be offered to help people see what we see.
Well, the one book at the back I'd probably recommend as a good starting place is this one called Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Everybody wants to know why the universe is the way it is. And it's written at a lay level, but basically shows you how God designed the universe with evil and suffering in mind. How all the physics of the universe is targeting the elimination of evil and suffering. And contrast that with the new creation where evil and suffering will never exist again. It's basically making the point that the non-Christian religions have a one creation model. Christianity has a two creation model. God creates his universe to eliminate evil and suffering and bring redemption to humanity. But there's a new creation coming where evil and suffering will never exist again. So it goes into free will, predestination, evil and suffering, but all in the context of why God made the universe the way he did. And for the person who wants to dig into the scientific details, a good summary book is More Than a Theory. That's where we get into these questions that Frank Pastore asked. When Frank and I were good friends, we talked about this a lot. And so that helps people get into the origin of life, the origin of the universe, the origin of humanity. And if people want to go into more depth, we got entire books that deal with each subject individually. More Than a Theory summarizes 8 of our books. But we realize you need to have one book that kind of puts it all together. So, but for the non-scientist, I would start with this. For the animal lover, I would give them the Job book. Because you know, a lot of people say this science is a bit heady for me. Everybody loves animals. But they don't realize how God designed birds and mammals, cows, horses, and donkeys to lead us to him. And the book of Job tells you in a beautiful way how that happens. But keep in mind, a lot of people, probably even here, have never gotten that close to a donkey to see the features that are mentioned in the book of Job.
We have a couple of honorary members of this congregation who are Sicilian miniature donkeys and represent us often in the 4th of July parade.
Oh, wow.
Their names are Ben and Jerry.
Got some weird.
Yes, hi. My question is, how do you reconcile the timing of the creation of the universe with science and some interpretations of the Bible?
Sure.
14 billion or 6,000?
Right. Well, I didn't meet Christians till I came here to California at age 27. And I was coming here that I realized there's actually people who believe that these days of creation in Genesis 1 are 24-hour periods. When I read it at age 17, it says, first of all, there's no evening and morning for day 7. And the 7th day is when God brings about the end of evil and suffering and redemption. That day is still going on. That day must be a long period of time. And also recognize in Genesis 6, it says the human male and the human female are both made on that 6th day. But in Genesis 2, God makes Adam first, outside the Garden of Eden. He watches the trees grow in the garden. He's placed in the garden. He works the garden long enough to realize there's more to life than gardening. Then God has him name all his soulish animals and see how each one was designed to serve and please him in a different way. Then the text says that God observed that he was lonely. Then God puts him to sleep, performs surgery on him, he recovers from the surgery, and when he sees Eve, the word that's expressed there in the original Hebrew coming out of Adam's mouth, hapa-am, used more than 20 times in the Old Testament, consistently translated at long last. Therefore, the sixth day, likewise, is a long period of time. And when I got to be in my 20s, I realized the Hebrew word yom, that's translated day, has 4 different literal definitions. Part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, a 24-hour period, or a long but finite period of time. And in biblical Hebrew, the only word you've got for an epoch of time is the word yom. Moses had no other way to describe 6 epochs of time except to use the word yom. And so God creates in 6 literal long periods of time. Therefore, there's no contradiction between God creating the universe 13.8 billion years ago and the earth 4.57 billion years ago, and what Genesis and the rest of the Bible teaches. In fact, if you read through the Old Testament, look at all the places where it talks about the age-old hills, that ancient river Kishon, and it goes on and on.
Way in the back.
I'm responding to the comments. I have 3 comments. Thank you that I'm blessed to be here. And in a quote, science gives faith wings. That's from a Unity literature, I believe. And I feel that you supported that. And then this is from Annie Dillard, an amazing author and convert to Christianity. I know many physicists. Most of them were stark raving mystics, like that. And then the third comment is the late movie that's marvelously filled with beautiful scenery in nature. Thomas Keating, the film, focuses much on nature as a way to God. And by the way, I have a dog, a service dog in the back. If anybody would like to notice, a dog could name Peace.
Well, it's interesting that you shared that. I mean, I remember when I was at Caltech, I wanted to talk to the atheist physicists and astronomers there about God. I would take them up into the high Sierras. We'd get up on one of these beautiful meadows, and we would have a meal, and then we'd begin to talk. They wouldn't talk to me about God at Caltech, but when they saw all this beauty, and the comment I remember hearing from a couple of these physicists, why is this so beautiful? Why are galaxies so beautiful? And it's that beauty principle that tells us there must be a God behind it all that enjoys beauty, and he shared it with all of us. I mean, he could have made all food to look brown and taste like cardboard, but he didn't. It's got all these beautiful flavors and colors. I mean, why?
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes. Okay. Gerhard.
Maybe the conversation should also address the topic, science and the church, enemies or allies. From the Middle Ages to now, first the Catholic Church, now the conservative churches, have been kind of hostile to science. First, the earth is flat, and now climate change doesn't exist. It's not scientifically proven. So, what is your position on that? Is there a dichotomy between science and the church?
Between science and the Bible, I would say there is no split. I mean, the Bible is saying the same thing as the book of nature. However, there is a split between scientists and theologians. And science is not the same as the book of nature. It's our attempt to interpret that book of nature. And theology is not the same as the Bible. It's our attempt to interpret the Bible. So we would expect that scientists and theologians will disagree, and science and theology would disagree. But as a Christian, I look at those disagreements as an opportunity to dig deeper and see where the misinterpretations lie and how we can put the two together. And it's interesting, that's how science operates, is that we believe that everything in science fits together in a harmonious way. So if we see a conflict between biology and physics, we know we've made a misinterpretation. And theology works that way. We believe that all 66 books of the Bible are from the one that inspired it, the creator of the universe. And therefore, we see what looks like a contradiction between Isaiah and Hebrews. We know we've made a mistake of interpretation. We dig deeper and ferret that out. So you raised the question of global warming. What's interesting is how frequently the book of Job addresses the question of climatology. And basically makes the point that God gave us this planet with all of its beauty and elegance in such a way that we face a crisis managing it. And actually, if you look at Job 37, 38, and 39, it's a creation care manual. In Genesis, God gave us a single sentence: manage the planet and its resources for the benefit of all life. But he doesn't tell us how. These 3 chapters in Job tell us how. But the basic principle there is God designed the planet and its life in such a way that we face a crisis in management. God in advance has provided us with solutions that are optimally ethical and at the same time optimally economic. The reason why we've got to fight on global warming is because one side says we need to be ethical and sacrifice our economy. The other side says we need to boost our economy and not worry about the ethics. The truth is we can put both together. There are solutions to global warming that will be the best for reconciling the climate problem. At the same time, they will boost our economy. If you can come up with solutions like that, you take the politics out. I mean, conservatives and liberals both will vote for that kind of a plan. But it doesn't have to be a fight. Likewise, it doesn't have to be a fight in the church or in the scientific community. Everybody's going to like a solution like that. Moreover, it tells us something. There must be a God to explain why our optimal economic solutions are identical to our optimal ethical solutions. That wouldn't be the case if it was just strictly nature up there. There must be a God that's behind it and explains it. Anyway, in the book of Job, you'll see 3 solutions to global warming that are simultaneously optimally ethical and optimally economic.
One other objection I often hear from young earth creationists is the idea of man introducing death into the world, and them saying that evolution, is dependent on death to drive natural selection, and stuff. And so, it's the saying, evolution says through death came man, and creation says that through man came death. I'm wondering, how would you respond to claims like that?
Well, I debate young earth creationists quite frequently, and we don't have the DVDs here, but you can see them. Some of them are available for free on our website, and that comes up every single time. What about death before Adam? And it's based on a misquote of Romans 5. Romans 5 does not say that all death came about through Adam's offense. What it says is death through sin was visited upon all men. Now, only one species can sin. That's human beings. The animals don't sin. I wrote about that in the Job book, how we now have experiments that prove they don't sin. We're the only sinners on planet Earth. Death through sin was visited upon all men. So Paul makes 2. It's human death that came about through Adam's offense. The text does not say death to all life. It says death to all men. So the moment that Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, we immediately experience spiritual death. But notice in Genesis 3, verse 22, God sends 2 angels to prevent access of the tree of life. Here they were in a spiritually dead state, but with the potential to live forever physically. And the message of the rest of the Bible is how God uses physical death as a tool to deliver us from the far worse consequence of spiritual death. That's the message of the New Testament. The only way you can truly live is to die. Death is a pathway to life. And as far as the rest of life goes, Psalm 104, verse 25 to 31, it's the property of all life to die off, but God recreates and renews the face of the earth. And that's the fossil record. We see dozens of instances where life almost wholesale is removed and replaced with brand new life. This is God's way of ensuring we have all the resources we need for global high technology civilization. If it wasn't for the death before Adam, you wouldn't have gasoline to get you here to church on Sunday morning. And all the metals you see were concentrated by bacteria, almost all of them were concentrated by bacterial activity. 99% of the city of Los Angeles is processed biodeposits. So it's something else we thank God for at Thanksgiving, is all those sulfate-reducing bacteria that lived and died for billions of years, so that we can have metals that we can mine and launch ourselves out of the Stone Age. But Psalm 104 said it first.
How long is your prayer on Thanksgiving? Julie?
You used a term before, an adjective, soulish, I
Yes.
believe. Animals, could you explain that, please?
Yes, well, we have to be careful with that term because there's a different word for soulish in the Old Testament Hebrew than the Greek New Testament. In the New Testament, it's only used once for non-human animals, whereas it's frequently used for non-human animals in the Old Testament. And it's referring to God endowing certain animals with mind, will, and emotions, and giving them a motivation to sacrifice for their young. So any species of life where the parents nurture their young in such a way that they sacrifice on behalf of their young is in that category. But these are all the animals that have the capacity to emotionally bond with human beings. So a cockroach won't bond to you, but a rabbit will, or a dog will, or a parrot will. So God is making the point. There's two different kinds of non-human life. Life is purely physical, and life that's physical and soulish. But also makes the point that if you take the sin factor out, these soulish animals want to relate to human beings. And so if you go to places where they've never been abused by human beings, you see these animals are drawn to us. And they want to serve and they want to please us. Well, that's actually a message that Job makes, where Job says, as these animals were designed to serve and please us, a higher species, we were designed to serve and please a higher being. And if it wasn't for our sin, we would run to God rather than away from God.
I really have two questions. One question is about all the discoveries written about lately about the planets that they found, planets, and I wonder what consequence that has to our understanding of life, or whether we can read much out of that. What's the chance of having life on those planets? And then the other question is about the timeline of the life on Earth. I wonder how the science looks at it in terms of from the beginning and up to humankind, and then is there anything the Bible says about that?
Okay, let me hit your last part first. In terms of the timeline for life, the origin of life is about 3.82 billion years ago. And that's the same time when liquid water and rocks now appear in the earth in permanent form. That's why I said it's instantaneous. The very first time it's even possible, it happens just like that. And what you see in Psalm 104, God packs our planet with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, and as long as possible. And we human beings are at the end of the line. Our planet very shortly will become sterile. But by putting us at the very end, we're the beneficiaries of all this packing of the planet with life that predated us for 3.82 billion years. And the fossil record starts off simple and then goes complex. And again, what we see is that oxygen is gradually building up in the atmosphere of the Earth thanks to photosynthetic life being created right at the beginning. And that's what's just shocking to a lot of scientists. This Origin of Life conference I talked about, the stunner is you got photosynthetic life right at the very beginning. That's one of the most complex unicellular life forms that exists, and it's right there at the beginning. But it's pumping oxygen in the atmosphere. And as the oxygen goes up, God creates life to take advantage of that oxygen. So it explains why you don't have animals until 575 million years ago. That's the first time you got enough oxygen to even make animal life possible. And that's something else we're now discovering. No time lags in the history of life. From an evolutionary perspective, when the oxygen content hits 8% and animal life is possible, you'd expect a time lag. But there is no time lag. The animals show up right away. They show up explosively with multiple phylum of life all showing up all at once. I mean, Richard Dawkins, a famous atheist, said, when it comes to the Cambrian explosion, these animals show up out of nowhere with no evolutionary history. It's an instantaneous appearance, and it includes the same phylum that we human beings belong to. Exoplanets. As of this morning, 1,750 exoplanets have been discovered and measured with their orbits, and we're well on the way to getting past 10,000 discovered planets, and we're actually finding a lot of Goldilocks planets, and this is what's stimulating the discussion, that we're going to find life everywhere within our galaxy, because we're finding Goldilocks planets. A Goldilocks planet is a planet that has the possibility of liquid water surviving on the surface. But as an astronomer, I can tell you that water is the second or third most abundant molecule in the universe. The universe is really wet. There's water everywhere. And so if you got the right temperature, you're going to have liquid water. And I believe we're going to find tens of thousands of planets in our galaxy that where liquid water exists. But the problem is, the liquid water planets we found so far have way too much water. We found about 3, and they're all coming in with about 500 times as much water as planet Earth. So we're relatively dry. We're only 0.03% water. That's because we got a thin layer of water on the surface that we can have continents. And with continents, you can have nutrient recycling, and you can have advanced animals. If all you've got is water on the surface, that won't happen. In fact, you can't even have dolphins unless you've got continents, because the dolphins need that recycling in order to survive. So water's not the only thing. I think what excites me as an astronomer, back in 1995, when we discovered the first planet outside of the solar system, the presumption was we're going to find that all these extrasolar planets are just like ours. Well, even with over 1,700 discovered and measured, none of them are like any of our solar system planets. We don't find a Jupiter twin, a Saturn twin, a Neptune twin, a Venus twin, an Earth twin, none of them. And by the way, we don't even find a solar twin. We can't find a star that's sufficiently like the sun that would be a candidate to have life advanced life on a planet orbiting it. And what it has done is it's shown us that every one of the 8 planets in our solar system plays a crucial role in making possible advanced life here on planet Earth. In fact, I'm writing a book on that right now, how each of these planets is a very fine-tuned design to make possible advanced life. So yeah, another thing we celebrate on Thanksgiving, we thank God for Venus, for Mercury, for Mars, for Jupiter, Neptune, and all the rest, because without them, we couldn't have Thanksgiving.
As we know, in about 5.5 billion years, the sun is going to run out of fuel, and we're going to have a supernova. Depending on how far out it expands, Earth will either be uninhabitable or it'll be destroyed. Is God planned to end human life, or is He already planned for us to move to one of these exoplanets?
Well, you've got a point there. The sun in 4 billion years will become so big that it'll actually incinerate the Earth. So if you're making plans for investments, keep that in mind, that don't plan on more than 4 billion years. But the truth is, I wouldn't even plan on more than a few million years, because the sun is getting progressively brighter and brighter. And the way God has been dealing with that is He's been creating life in different steps and stages that progressively draws down the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So as the sun gets brighter and brighter, thanks to the life that He creates, more and more greenhouse gases are pulled into the atmosphere. But it won't be long before the sun will be so bright that if you pull the necessary greenhouse gases out to maintain the temperature you need for life, there won't be enough carbon dioxide for photosynthetic activity. And when that happens, all animal life will become extinct. And we humans will go extinct first, because we need that aggressive photosynthetic activity in order to sustain our population and our civilization. But the benefit of all that is that means that God purposely waited to the very end to create us human beings, so we could take advantage of all the resources provided by 3.8 billion years of human life. And what it told me when I first understood this as a new Christian, that means that God's going to conquer the problem of evil quickly, not slowly. He's not going to take millions of years. He's going to do it in hundreds of years instead of millions of years, because it won't be long before we wouldn't be able to survive here. And the moment evil is conquered, God is going to eliminate this universe from existence. As He spoke it into existence, He will speak it out of existence and replace it with a brand new realm with radically different physics and radically different dimensions. Notice in this universe, you're constrained to one dimension at a time. I don't think we'll be constrained to just one dimension at a time in the new creation, which explains to me Revelation 21 and 22. No marriage, no families, no sex, none of that's necessary, because we'll no longer be constrained to length, width, height, and time, and gravity, and quantum mechanics, and electromagnetism. God's going to replace all that with something far better, but not until evil is conquered and eliminated, and redemption has been brought to as many human beings as possible. And I believe that's going to happen quickly. Matter of fact, I'll give you this word of encouragement, and this came from my friend Ralph Winter of the U.S. Center for World Mission. How evangelical Christians today have the numbers and the money and the resources and the technology to fulfill the Great Commission in 5 years. All we lack is the motivation. So we could bring about the return of Christ quite quickly. And that's what Christ told us. As soon as we finish the job, He's coming back. And when He comes back, He's going to replace His universe with a brand new creation. And hey, read why the universe is the way it is. I think it'll make you really excited about getting ready for life in the new creation. It's way better than what's happening right now.
Any more questions? Yes?
So is
Oh,
hi, I don't understand any of the science stuff, but you said something in the beginning about first it was hot and then something happened and then it was cold, about the expansion in the very beginning, what you were saying. And
Yes.
so my question is global warming really true? What you were saying about the sun and everything, is that a truth, or is it something that we're just being told?
Global warming is real. What is being debated is how much of that global warming is natural and how much is human input. And we're kind of where we are with climatology, where we were with weather forecasting 100 years ago. 100 years ago, the weatherman could tell you what the weather was going to be like tomorrow morning, but not in the evening. Whereas now they can tell you with some precision what the weather will be like 10 days from now. And so here are the error bars. We know that the human factor in global warming is between 20 and 80%. So that's how uncertain this stuff is. That's why there's so much debate going on. But if you look at the ice cores, global warming has been a factor. In other words, every 100,000 years, the planet gets warm, then it cools off, and you get an ice age. And typically the ice age lasts 80, 90,000 years, and the warm interglacial 10 to 20,000 years. And what you see in the last 8 cycles, it goes up the temperature and it quickly drops down. What's unusual, it hit 3 degrees centigrade short of the maximum temperature. And for the last 8,000 years, it's been level. But now it's starting to go up again. And the concern is this: if it rises that 3 degrees centigrade, we're going to see a catastrophic drop in temperature, and we're going to get an ice age. And so we don't want things that get cold. You really don't want things getting a whole lot more warmer. And the challenge is our best global warming models are actually predicting places where it's going to get a lot colder. So it's going to get colder according to the best models in Western Europe, Eastern US, and Eastern Asia, and warmer in places like California. And it's going to get warmer in the Arctic and colder in the Antarctic. And that's kind of what we've been seeing the past 20 years. In fact, I can tell you, and I'm from Canada, that polar ice cap is half the size it was when I was a young child. And if the polar ice cap completely melts, then you've got a scenario which could bring about the next ice age. Because instead of having an ice cap over the Arctic, you've now got open water, which means it absorbs more heat, evaporates more water, and that's going to cause more snow to fall on Siberia and Canada. And that's typically what launches an ice age. We don't have that happening right now because Siberia and Canada, northern Canada, are deserts. They only get 10 inches of precipitation, not enough for the snow and ice to accumulate. But if it goes up to 20 inches, it will accumulate and you will get an ice age. And therefore, I think it's important that we do what we can to stave off the next ice age. And by the way, it's temporary. It's going to happen no matter what we do, just because of what's happening with the orbit of the Earth. But we can stave it off. And if you follow the guidelines in Job 37 and 38 and 39, it gives us the best prescription for staving it off long enough for that time when God decides to step in and replace his universe with a new universe. I'm making plans not to go into the next ice age. I think we can get the Great Commission fulfilled before then. Nevertheless, what you see in the Bible is occupy until I come. We're to take the best possible care of planet Earth and all of its life and do with all the resources that God has given us. And therefore there's no excuse to let down in terms of the management of a planet. But hey, the book of Job tells us how to do the best possible job. Couple over here.
Hi. So you said that you looked at the numbers for how long that the Earth was around, and you said that evolution can be possible because the numbers don't work out correctly. Like, I'm wondering, what do you mean by that? Like, is it not enough time, or is it too much time, or like, because 4 billion years is a lot longer than anyone's seen. It's what I think it's plenty of time to have lots of things happen. So I just want to get your view on it.
Well, let me tell a story to put this in perspective. Big Bang cosmology was first seriously proposed in 1925. And Big Bang cosmology was a revolution in astronomy, because up until then we thought the universe was infinitely old. The Big Bang told us it was only billions of years old. And immediately there was a reaction from non-believing astronomers, because they said if it's only billions of years, we can't save Darwin's theory of biological evolution. It doesn't provide enough time. There was about a 30-year period in the 20th century where astronomers from a non-theistic perspective were trying to find some way to make the universe about a quadrillion years old, because they felt that would then give enough time for Darwinian evolution. So whatever illusions the biologists had, the astronomers realized if it's only 10 zeros, we can't save Darwin. We need at least 16 zeros if we're going to save Darwin. But eventually the evidence became overwhelming that the universe is only billions of years old. It's not trillions. It's not quadrillions. And one of the things that the astronomers recognize is that the Darwinian driving mechanisms are mutations, natural selection, and gene exchange. But they tend to work in such a way as to favor simplicity over complexity. In fact, Francisco Ayala at the University of California, Irvine, once spoke at a conference on extraterrestrial intelligent life. He said, if we take the Darwinian model and assume it operates as efficiently as possible for billions of years, the probability of beginning with bacteria and ending up with the equivalent of human beings is less than 1 chance in 10 to the 1 millionth power. And 3 physicists at the same meeting stepped in and said, Francisco, you're assuming no changes in the chemistry and physics of the solar system. In fact, we know that it changes dramatically. You heard me talk about the physics of the sun. We take that into account, the probability drops to less than 1 chance in 10 to the 14 billionth power, or 14 millionth power in the index. And to put that in context, that's the same probability of you winning the California lottery 3 million consecutive times when you buy just 1 ticket each time. Or as one mathematician friend of mine put it, it's no different than the probability of winning the California lottery 3 million consecutive times where you don't buy any tickets at all. There's just no chance. And that's why biologists who study the Darwinian model say there cannot be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. It simply won't happen in that time scale. But by the same token, we are possible, and yet we're here. So we must have gotten here by a non-Darwinian pathway.
Hi, Dr. Ross. I'm upstairs. I want to thank you for your work. I grew up in a very conservative Dutch Christian Reformed town where it's young earth or hell. And I came out to LA and I've been teaching middle school earth science for the last 23 years. And for the first 5 or 6 years of doing that, very hard for me to resolve the 2 worlds. Your work helped me do that, and so I thank you for that. When I go back home, as the black sheep, I get into the debates, and I find none of the young earth arguments compelling except for the words in Exodus 20:11. So if you would be willing to talk about that, it would help me even more. Thank you.
Well, there's a basic principle there when someone brings up a passage of the Bible to make a theological point. Well, let's not just look at that passage. Let's look at everything the Bible says on that subject. And so Exodus 20 is talking about the 10 Commandments. But there's 4 other places in the Torah that likewise does that. 2 in Deuteronomy, 2 in Exodus, and 1 in Leviticus. And so you look at all of those, one you'll discover that in the Leviticus text, it talks about the Sabbath rest for humans, but also talks about the Sabbath rest for the agricultural land. In the context of the agricultural land, we're to work it for 6 days that are 6 years. And then we're given a Sabbath rest of 1 year. Now, from a biological perspective, we understand why. Without pesticides, it's crucial that you let the agricultural land lie fallow for a year to kill off the nematodes, or at least reduce their population. That's what makes the agricultural land most productive. Now, for humans, in fact, you'll see a book out there called Navigating Genesis. It just got released this week. But we have a sub-chapter there on the Sabbath. And we make the point that in the French Revolution, they tried to come up with 9 days of work and 1 day of rest. And in the Soviet Union, they came up with 5 days of work and 1 day of rest. It was 4 days of work and 1 day of rest. And both those experiments were failures. we realize that biologically we human beings are designed to work for 6 days and rest on the 7th day. Now, God is not a biological entity. He's not constrained by biology. And so his work period could be an indeterminate length, and his rest period likewise could be of indeterminate length. And the benefit of going to those 5 texts in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and Exodus is that only 2 of them do you see the comparison between God's work week and a human work week. And in none of them do you see the preposition that shows up in Exodus chapter 20, where it says, in 6 days. Well, the word in is not there. And if you take that word out, then it takes on quite a different definition. So look at all 5 texts. Read it in the original Hebrew, or get out a Hebrew linear, see what words are there and what words are not there. And what you realize is that God is giving us an analogy that you see in all the rest of the holy days that the Jews celebrate. So, for example, you've got the celebration of the 38 years of wandering in the wilderness. And what were the Jews commanded to do? Take 8 days off to celebrate those 38 years. So 8 earthly days represent 38 years in the wilderness. Likewise, we work 6 days and rest of the 7th. By analogy, God works 6 time periods and rests of the 7th period. And that's really the principle there. We work for 6 days and take a 7th day. As it says in Romans 14, you're free to take whatever day you want. Just make sure you take 1 day at a 7. And on that day, focus on the most important issues of life, and also on that day,